So I'm working on the ceiling panels that'll go in the renovation, starting with a 1/4 inch plywood, making sure it's sanded and smooth, vacuumed up all the dust. And what I'm going to try to do is what's called pickling, which gives them a whitewashed effect. And I do that by diluting white paint with water. So I'm going with a 50-50 mix of paint and water. And I did one of these before and put the paint on with a paintbrush and then kind of wiped it off with a rag afterwards. And it didn't turn out so well. Um, Part of the reason I think is that this plywood, it's not true plywood. It's got like a real thin little layer on top of like a mixed, grinded up sort of material, almost like a pulp. So it doesn't absorb very well. And the other reason I don't think it works so good the first trial I did is by putting it on with a paintbrush, it would dry in certain spots before I could wipe it down. We've got an 8-foot piece here, so to cover this whole thing and get it even is pretty difficult because you don't want the paint to completely cover. You want to be able to see the wood grain. So I'm going to try something different this time. I'm going to try applying it with a sponge. And rather than put paint on the wood, I'm just going to dip the sponge in the paint bucket and then smear it on, and hopefully I'll be able to do that and wipe it in a more even fashion. So see how that turns out. So this turned out pretty good. It definitely looks better than the first one I did when I used the paintbrush and just tried to smear it around with a rag after putting it on with the paintbrush. It's a lot more even, and I was kind of able to use pressure to determine how much paint I wanted and smooth it out a little bit better that way. So you can still see the grain in it. It's not completely white. It's like a faded white, I guess. So I think what I'm going to do next is put a coat of polyurethane on it. It's a matte finish polyurethane, so it won't be too glossy. But that's the other trick, is to get a coat of that on here without leaving brush strokes is pretty tough because it does start to dry right away. The first one of these I did when I tested it, you could see like run marks and everything from the polyurethane. Even though I put it on real thin, this whole thing kind of slopes. You can see how it slopes off to the left a little bit. The stands I got this on, so it all kind of just ran down there and it left like drip marks, which look pretty tacky. Look at Ricky over there peeking. He just always got to be in the shot. Here he comes. You heard his name. So yeah, I'm going to try that again. I'm just going to try to do it a little bit quicker so I can get the polyurethane blended all the way across nice and evenly. We'll see if that turns out okay. So I'm happy with how this turned out. You can still see some of the grain in the wood, so it still has a little bit of character, but it doesn't look like a boring sheet of plywood. And this will make it a bit nicer than drywall. Don't really like drywall and painted ceilings. It's got a little bit of texture, and it'll look a little bit more natural. I need to do a bunch of these though, so that's going to be the tricky thing, is I need probably about 10 of them to cover the ceiling. And I've only got space to do 2 at a time. So now that I got a process lined out, I'll be able to do 2 of them at a time, but it'll be a little while before I get them all done and get the ceiling up. The one that I made first that didn't turn out so well, I could still use that piece in the closet, so it won't go to waste. Getting ready to start hanging these ceiling panels up. And what I did is I made a guide. That piece of trim that you see taped to the top runs along the ceiling joist all the way. You can kind of see that black mark at the end of it there. That's where the ceiling joist meets the top of the wall. And then I drilled holes every 16 inches in this little guide I got. So that's where the screws are going to go in to hold it in place. That guide will come off, of course, before I put the screws in. And I did that so that when this is all done and the whole ceiling is covered, that those screws, theoretically, from that hole right there where there will be a screw, should be a straight line, kind of like a grid every 16 inches to keep the hardware even across. And then up in the edges, it's just stapled in place to support the weight on that end and on that end. Once everything gets together, there'll be trim, like a crown molding across the top there, crown molding, across the top there. And then where each panel meets the next, so there'll be another panel here, right where that meets, there'll be a piece of trim to cover the seam. And I got it all kind of figured out. Everywhere across the top that you see a red star, that's where there's going to be a seam. So you can see there's another one there. So there'll be a 4-foot piece to a 4-foot piece, then there'll be like a little thin strip here. And I kind of have that figured that it'll be centered on this column that'll be exposed when the walls are done. So that will kind of hopefully carry a nice straight line across. Fingers crossed, we'll see. So to lift these panels up myself, I figured out a way to do that without a scaffold. Kind of just put this 2x4, screw it in place temporarily with like a little bit of a ledge at the top of it. And then I'll take the panel and wedge the top part up there and then pick up the bottom part and kind of just put it in place. The weight of it will be supported on that little 2x4 bit, and then just put some temporary staples in it until I could smooth it out and screw it in permanently. Well, here's how it's coming along so far. Those seams that you see will be what's covered up with trim whenever I finish the walls and all that. But I got the light fixture in, and then this is all held up with these screws. And I don't know if I'm going to like how this all looks when it's done or not. It's going to look pretty manufactured, but we'll see. Because I got these screws are very obvious. I could have gotten like white ones or tan ones so you wouldn't see them as much. So I don't know, but they're nice in a nice line. I did do that properly, at least, is get them spaced as they should. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I like those or not. I could always change them later, I guess. But that's where we're at. I've got a lot more to do. But it's coming along pretty well. And there's Ricky. He's bored.